Welcome back for part 2 of our conversation about DxO's PhotoLab 4. This is Let's Talk, episode 22. My name is Falcon. I will be your host today. We're going to pick up in part where we left off at the end of the previous conversation about PhotoLab 4. In front of us is the image that we were working on, and if you look down low, I've created a virtual copy. We'll talk about when to do that in the future, but for the moment that's going to be our baseline as we review the various corrections that we're about to apply. Number one, I very much like what we were able to do thus far with this image. Number two, this is not exactly the experience I had when I was there that day creating this image. If you're not familiar with our work, we define a photograph as a visual invitation to an emotional experience. From a technical perspective, this image is quite good. However, photographed with a Pentax 645Z and a 70-year-old vintage lens not supported directly by DxO, the image is a bit flat, and in addition to that, notice that the sun is coming across the image. This was created late in the fall in the southeastern United States, but the sides and the grass, it's all kind of flat in terms of how the light falls. So what I want to do is get as close to that moment as I possibly can, and the most effective way to do that will be through the use of local adjustments. This is an extremely powerful tool. Now, as is the case with everything else, there is a very specific way in which we do this. It may be a bit counterintuitive, but for us it works, and I would urge you to develop your own ritual as to how to use local adjustments. So, in an ideal world, the darkest part of the image would be here. And it would not only be the side of the truck, but it would also be to some extent on the grass. The lightest would be here because obviously it's most directly in the path of the light. Notice the fall off. It is a bit darker here than it is here. The transition area is the area of the door and the front of the truck. My goal is going to be to create an image in which the light more closely mirrors what I experienced that day, so that the image will better convey the emotional experience of the moment. When I use local adjustments, when I use control points, I always move from dark to light. The exception here will be the transition area. I will save that until the end so that I can make sure that the transition from the darker to the lighter areas will be exactly the way that I want it. I'm going to begin with the grass. I'm going to work up to the truck, then to the front, and then to the door. So let's get started. I can right-click at this point and choose a number of options. If I wanted to create a virtual copy, I would. If I wanted to export the original to disk, I could do that as well. What I'm going to do instead is bypass all that. I already have created my virtual copy. I'm going to go to local adjustments. I'm going to right-click. Actually, you can see on the images, I've already applied some. I'm going to delete these, and we'll do this again. The delete key is sufficient to remove the control points. So, you can now see the image minus any of the changes that I made. I'm going to begin in the grass, and I'm going to pick what amounts to a medium brown. Now I can either zoom in here to get a closer approximation, or I can come down to clear view, noise reducing, and center my control point on the grass. By moving that control point, I can find the medium brown, which is right there. And now I'm going to close. I'm going to turn on my local adjustments. I'm going to right click on that brown, and I'm going to add a control point. It's important to keep in mind that control points center on the color. So in this case, having chosen a medium brown, I want to be careful to exclude areas like the shrubbery, or they can potentially become darker than I want them to be. It's also important to note that I'm going to use two control points so that they will in effect overlap each other. I want to taper the effect here. So if I go back to my original control point, what I do on one will work on the other, and you can see the brown is dropping down. I don't want to come too much. I want to come just enough to begin to create the hint of shadows and darkness. Again, I'm going to increase my micro contrast. I'm going to increase my clear view, which is going to give me a little bit more black. I'm also going to darken my midtones. You can see they're lightening. I'm going to come down. It's totally subjective as to what constitutes an adequate change. I am keeping in my mind what it looked like that day. I'm also going to drop my shadows and darken them a little bit. And finally, I'm going to blacken the black. So if we look at the virtual copy, it'll take a minute to draw the preview. You can already see the difference in the area here versus the area in the image on which we're working. Again, I could make it more profound, but I want it to be subtle. Alright, now I'm going to work on the truck. I can't just put another control point here unless I want to specifically duplicate the effect that I created on the grass. Also here, I want to pick a different color. I want to zero in on one of these shades of gray. I'm going to right click. I'm going to add a new layer, or a new mask as it's called. I'm going to come to the gray, and I'm going to add a control point. I'm going to repeat the process of darkening, adding micro contrast, adding clear view, pulling down my highlights, and now adding the shadow, the mid-tones, and a little bit of black. So I'm going to add a second one here because I want to extend that effect over into the transition area. As control points overlap, you can get some great transitional effects. I'm going to put one more control point back here. Notice also that I'm putting it within the radius of previous ones. And that is going to carry my effect slightly off the truck into the woods. And you can see now it's darkened just a little bit. So by way of comparison, let's go look at our virtual image again. considerably different. Much flatter, much more even light. And now, back to our work. So, I'm now going to target this area of the front of the truck. I want to be careful here not to lose any detail, because the tendency is that as I increase my exposure, I do and can often lose some detail. So I'm going to again pick a middle color. I'm going to again expand that control point. And I'm going to do the same thing I've done. I'm going to start with my exposure, except here I'm going to pick it up. Notice how the weights have pulled up. I'm going to add a little bit of micro contrast. I'm going to pick my clear view up to give it some definition and also to counter the effect of increasing my exposure too much. Okay, now I can pick my exposure up just a little bit more. There we go. And now, similarly, I'm going to pull the highlights down, take the edge off. Notice how I'm beginning to get some ripples in the front of the truck that match the sheet metal. At this point, if I want, I can also adjust the shadows. I'm going to leave them alone. I'm happy with where it is. I am going to go down to detail, and I am going to add sharpness. All right, let's compare it, and then we'll add the third and final area. Back to our virtual image. Again, compared to what we've just created, very flat, very monotone, not terribly dramatic. I'll let the full preview take place. There you see it. We've got the shadows back here again. We've got the fall off on the grass. There's an even transfer of color. And I like the fact that the sun is now evenly striking across the front. So the last area is the transitional area, and we're going to go there next. Right click, new mask, control point. The goal here is going to be to more or less split the difference between the front and the back. So I want my exposure to be lower than it is here, but higher than it is here. I'm also going to move it over a little bit so that the outer edge intersects with the control point that's there. And here I'm just slightly going to nudge up. I'm going to notice as I work with clear view, I can pull detail in and darken it. I want to be very careful to make the transition look even. So I'm going to back it down a little bit. I'm going to increase my exposure just a little bit more. Okay. At this point, I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. I'm just going to pull the highlights down a little bit. And now, a little bit of sharpness. Okay, I'm going to turn off local adjustments at this point, and we will compare the two images. There's the finished image. In retrospect, I might tone this down just a little bit. But overall, I'm content with where it is. I might also be able, if I adjust the exposure a little bit more, to get a tad more of the detail here. However, the debris that's fallen on the truck is much more obvious. So if we compare this now to the original, or the virtual copy of the original, Again, a good image. Nothing wrong with it from a technical perspective, but from an emotional perspective, to me, it lacks a bit. I'm also bothered by the fact that given the angle of reflection of the light on the roof, there's not much that I could do. By comparison, when I go to the finished image, and I'm going back there now, you can notice that my eye comes more to the center of the truck here. I am not as quickly distracted by the fact that this is overlit. And the light seems to wrap around the truck. It gets darker and disappears into the woods. So once again, a photograph is a visual invitation to an emotional experience. Ritual, predictability, doing the same thing the same way all the time is the key to developing a signature style. Anyway, I want to thank you for listening today. Again, my name is Falcon. I'm the senior partner of the House of NyghtFalcon. If you have any questions or you want to reach out to us about some additional potential seminars and workshops, just follow the end of this video to my contact information. Have a great day, and we'll be back soon. If you want to contact us, we can be reached at NyghtFalcon.com or our magazine site, nightvision.com. And if you want to email me directly, you can reach me at inspiration@nightfalcon.com.